The forest floor shook as Cale Ashford drove his fist into the chest of the wolf, who dared challenge him at the border of Silverfang territory. The challenger's ribs cracked under the force, and he crumpled into the dirt, gasping, defeated before the fight had truly begun. Cale did not smile. He never smiled after a win. Winning was expected of him. Losing was not an option that existed in his world. He stood over the fallen wolf, breathing steady, his eyes glowing gold in the moonlight. Around him, dozens of warriors from his own pack and from the rival pack watched in silence. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. The Alpha King of the Silverfang Nation had just ended a border dispute in less than a minute, the same way he ended every threat that came near his land. "Take him back to his pack," Cale said, his voice flat and commanding. "Tell his Alpha that the next time someone crosses my border without permission, I will not be as gentle." Two of his warriors dragged the injured challenger away. Cale turned and walked toward the tree line, his shoulders squared, his steps unhurried. He did not need to hurry. Nothing in this forest could catch him. Nothing in this world could stop him. He was the strongest wolf alive, and everyone around him knew it. But strength, Cale had learned long ago, came with a cost. It came with silence. It came with a throne that felt more like a cage than a seat of honor. It came with 1,000 wolves who respected him, and not a single one who truly knew him. He reached the edge of the forest where his personal guard waited, with the black horses that would carry them back to the Silverfang stronghold. Owen, his second in command, and the closest thing he had to a friend, fell into step beside him. "That was fast," Owen said, glancing at the blood on Cale's knuckles. "Even for you." "He was slow," Cale said simply. "They're always slow compared to you." Owen shook his head, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "One day, someone is going to be fast enough to actually land a hit. That day hasn't come yet." Owen didn't argue. Nobody argued with Cale. That was the strange curse of being undefeated. People stopped challenging your words the moment they stopped challenging your fists. They rode through the dark forest in silence, the horses' hooves echoing against the packed earth. Cale's mind wandered, though he would never admit that to anyone. He was thinking about the messenger who had arrived at the stronghold 2 days earlier, carrying a sealed letter from the Council of Packs. The letter had requested his presence at a gathering in the neutral territory of Ashwood Hollow, a place where rival alphas met to settle disputes without bloodshed. Cale despised these gatherings. They were slow, political, full of wolves who smiled to his face and plotted behind his back. But the council had insisted, citing a matter of significant importance to all packs, and even the Alpha King could not ignore a direct summons from the council without risking unrest among his allies. He had agreed to attend, reluctantly, and the gathering was set for 3 days from now. Cale told himself it was nothing more than another tedious obligation, another day spent listening to lesser alphas argue over land and resources while he waited for someone to say something worth his time. He had no way of knowing that in 3 days, everything about his life would change. The Silverfang stronghold rose out of the mountainside like a fortress carved from stone and shadow, its towers overlooking miles of forest in every direction. Cale had built this place from the ashes of his father's failed reign, and every wall of it reminded him of what he had sacrificed to get here. His father had been weak, not weak in body, but weak in resolve, too willing to compromise, too eager to please the packs around him instead of commanding their respect. Under his father's rule, the Silverfang pack had been pushed to the edges of their own territory, forced into treaties that favored everyone but themselves. Cale had watched his father die in a battle he should never have fought, killed by wolves who saw his hesitation as an invitation. Cale had sworn, standing over his father's body, that he would never hesitate. He would never show weakness. He would build a pack so strong that no one would ever dare test its borders again. And he had done exactly that. In 10 years, he had turned Silverfang from a fading territory into the most feared and respected nation among the wolves, a place other packs sought alliance with instead of war. But somewhere along the way, in his pursuit of strength, he had lost the ability to feel anything but control. He ruled with precision, not passion. He commanded with authority, not warmth. His pack respected him, feared him, followed him without question, but not one of them would call him a friend. and not one of them would dream of comforting him if he ever showed a moment of doubt. He told himself that this was the price of power, and he had made peace with paying it. That night, after the border dispute was settled and the stronghold had quieted, Cale stood alone on the balcony outside his chambers, looking out over the dark forest that stretched endlessly beneath him. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Somewhere far below, an owl called out into the night, and for a moment, Cale allowed himself to simply listen, to exist without the weight of command pressing on his shoulders. It never lasted long. It never did. A knock sounded at his door, and Cale turned to see Owen standing in the doorway, another letter in his hand. "This came for you," Owen said. "It's from Ashwood Hollow, confirmation of the gathering. They've added something to the agenda." "What is it?" Owen hesitated, which was unusual for him. "They want to discuss the missing packs, the ones that vanished near the eastern border last winter. Apparently someone found survivors." Cale's expression did not change, but something inside him sharpened with interest. The disappearance of 3 small packs near the eastern border had been a mystery no one had solved, a string of vanishings that left behind empty dens, and no bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing at all. It was the kind of unresolved threat that Cale could not ignore, because an enemy that could erase entire packs without a trace was an enemy that could one day come for Silverfang. "Survivors," Cale repeated. "Where were they found?" "Details are thin. The letter just says, a witness has come forward, someone who might know what happened." Owen paused again. "They want you there to hear it directly." Cale took the letter from Owen's hand and read it himself, his eyes moving quickly over the careful, formal handwriting of the council scribe. The words offered little more than what Owen had already told him, but there was a name at the bottom of the page, listed as the witness scheduled to speak. Wren Calloway. The name meant nothing to him. He had never heard it before, had no memory of any pack called Calloway among the territories he tracked. That in itself was strange. Cale made it his business to know every pack, every bloodline, every wolf of any significance within 100 miles of his border. A name he did not recognize was either insignificant or important enough to have been hidden. He handed the letter back to Owen. "We leave for Ashwood Hollow at dawn." "You're actually interested in this one," Owen said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I'm interested in anything that threatens my territory," Cale said. "Nothing more." But even as he said it, some quiet part of him knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was something about the missing name, the unexplained disappearances, the promise of an answer waiting 3 days away, that pulled at his attention in a way few things ever did. Cale had built his life around certainty, around knowing every threat before it arrived. The idea of an unknown danger, an unknown witness, an unknown name, unsettled the careful order he had constructed around himself. He did not sleep well that night. It was not fear that kept him awake. Cale did not know fear anymore, or told himself he didn't. It was something closer to anticipation, a restlessness he hadn't felt in years, as though some part of him sensed that the meeting at Ashwood Hollow was not going to be like the others. The 3 days passed slowly. Cale spent them attending to the business of his pack, settling disputes among his warriors, reviewing reports from his scouts along the border, meeting with the elders who advised him on matters of tradition and law. He performed every duty with his usual precision, but his mind kept drifting back to the letter, to the name he could not place, to the missing packs, and the survivor, who might finally explain what had happened to them. On the morning of the 3rd day, Cale rode out from the Silverfang stronghold with Owen and a small escort of warriors, leaving the rest of his forces to guard the territory in his absence. The journey to Ashwood Hollow took most of the day, winding through forest paths that grew narrower and older the further they traveled, until the trees themselves seemed to lean inward, forming a canopy so thick that little sunlight reached the ground below. Ashwood Hollow was unlike any other place Cale had visited. It was neutral ground, protected by an ancient agreement among all the wolf packs, a place where no pack held authority and no violence was permitted, no matter the history between those who gathered there. The hollow itself was a wide clearing at the center of the old forest, surrounded by towering stone pillars that some said were older than the packs themselves, remnants of a civilization long since vanished. At the center of the clearing stood a great stone circle, worn smooth by centuries of gatherings, where the Council of Packs convened to settle disputes and share news that affected every wolf in the region. By the time Kale and his escort arrived, the clearing was already filling with representatives from a dozen different packs. Alphas, betas, elders, and warriors mingled together under an uneasy truce, their conversations hushed, their eyes watchful. Kale's arrival drew immediate attention, as it always did. Wolves stepped aside to let him pass, their heads bowing slightly, their expressions carefully neutral. Fear, disguised as respect. It was a reaction Kale had grown so used to that he barely noticed it anymore. He took his place among the other alphas near the stone circle, Owen at his side, and waited for the gathering to begin. The council elder, an old wolf named Edric with silver hair and eyes that had seen more winters than most wolves lived to see, called the meeting to order, and the gathered crowd fell silent. The first hour passed exactly as Kale expected. Border disputes, trade agreements, a disagreement over hunting rights along a shared river. Kale listened with half his attention, his mind still turning over the mystery of the missing packs, waiting for the moment when the real reason for his presence would finally arrive. That moment came when Edric raised a hand and called for silence, his expression growing grave. "We turn now to a matter that concerns every pack in this gathering," Edric said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing despite its age. "Last winter, 3 packs vanished from the Eastern Territories without explanation. No bodies were found, no signs of battle. Entire dens emptied, as though their occupants simply disappeared into the night. Until now, we have had no answers." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kale straightened slightly, his attention fully focused now. "Today," Edric continued, "we have a witness. Someone who survived what happened to those packs and has agreed to share what she knows, in the hope that it might prevent further loss." Edric turned toward the edge of the clearing, and Kale followed his gaze, expecting to see someone he recognized, some minor alpha or elder from a pack he had crossed paths with before. Instead, he saw a young woman step out from among the gathered wolves, moving toward the center of the stone circle with a quiet, careful grace that seemed entirely out of place among the powerful, posturing figures surrounding her. She was not dressed like a warrior. She wore simple traveling clothes, worn from long journeys, and carried herself with the kind of caution that came from years of trying not to be noticed. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and her eyes, when she finally lifted them to look at the crowd, held a wariness that Kale recognized instantly. It was the look of someone who had survived something terrible and had not yet learned to trust the world again. "This is Wren Calloway," Edric said. "She has traveled a long way to speak with us today." Kale's eyes stayed fixed on her as she reached the center of the circle. There was nothing about her appearance that should have commanded his attention. She was not the strongest wolf in the clearing, not the most powerful, not even the most senior, and yet something about her presence pulled at him in a way he could not explain, a quiet gravity that made it impossible to look away. Wren glanced around at the gathered crowd, and Kale saw her hesitate, saw the flicker of fear cross her face as she took in the sheer number of powerful wolves waiting to hear what she had to say. For a moment, he thought she might turn and run, might decide that whatever safety she had found in silence was better than the risk of speaking now. Then she took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, barely carrying past the front rows of the gathering, but there was something in it, some quality Kale could not name, that made every wolf in the clearing lean forward to listen. It was not loud. It was not commanding in the way Kale's own voice was commanding, forged through years of giving orders that could not be questioned. It was something else entirely, something warm and steady, like a hand reaching out in the dark. "My pack was small," Wren said. "We lived along the eastern ridge, away from the larger territories, and we kept to ourselves. We didn't cause trouble, we didn't seek attention, we just wanted to live in peace." Kale found himself listening not just to her words, but to the sound of her voice itself, the way it rose and fell, the way it seemed to settle something inside him that he had not even realized was unsettled. He had heard thousands of voices in his life, wolves shouting orders, wolves begging for mercy, wolves lying to his face with practiced ease. He had never heard anything like this. The night it happened, I was away from the den, Ren continued. I had gone into the forest to gather herbs for my mother, who was ill. I heard nothing. No fighting. No cries for help. When I returned, everyone was gone. Not dead. Gone. As though they had simply walked away and never looked back. A heavy silence settled over the clearing. Kale noticed that even the most restless of the gathered alphas had gone still, captivated by the strange, quiet power of her voice. I searched for weeks, Ren said. I found nothing. No trail. No scent that made sense. It was as though something had erased them from the world entirely. She paused, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. I have carried this alone for almost a year, afraid that if I spoke of it, whatever took my pack would come for me next. But I could not stay silent any longer, not when I learned that 2 other packs suffered the same fate. Kale's mind was working through the implications of what she described, cataloging the details, searching for patterns, for anything that might explain a threat capable of erasing entire packs without a trace. This was exactly the kind of danger he had feared, an enemy invisible enough to strike without warning, powerful enough to leave no evidence behind. But even as his mind worked through the strategic weight of her words, some other part of him remained fixed entirely on the sound of her voice, on the strange, unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest as she spoke. It was calm, not the calm of control, the kind he forced onto himself through discipline and years of practice, but something softer, something that felt less like a wall being built, and more like a wall being taken down. He did not understand it, and Kale did not tolerate things he did not understand. He forced his attention back to the practical matter at hand, reminding himself that this was a council meeting, not a moment for whatever strange reaction his body was having to a stranger's voice. When Ren finished speaking, the clearing erupted into overlapping conversations, alphas turning to their advisors, elders murmuring among themselves, everyone trying to make sense of what she had described. Edric called for order, and the council began discussing what measures should be taken, which packs should increase their border patrols, whether search parties should be sent to investigate the sites where the missing packs had lived. Kale barely heard any of it. His eyes remained on Ren, who stood at the edge of the circle now, looking overwhelmed by the sudden attention, her arms wrapped around herself, as though trying to hold herself together. She looked so different from the powerful, confident alphas surrounding her, and yet she had commanded the attention of the entire gathering more completely than any of them could have managed. "You're staring," Owen murmured beside him, low enough that only Kale could hear. Kale did not answer immediately. He forced his gaze away from Ren and back toward Edric, who was now assigning tasks to different pack representatives, organizing a response to the threat she had described. "I'm evaluating a potential danger to my territory," Kale said finally, his voice carefully even. "Nothing more." Owen said nothing, but Kale could feel the skepticism radiating off him, and for once, he did not have the energy to argue the point further, because even he was not entirely certain it was true. The gathering continued for another hour, the council working through the logistics of investigating the disappearances, and Kale participated when necessary, offering his opinion on border security, agreeing to share information from his own scouts if anything unusual was discovered near Silverfang territory. But throughout it all, some part of his attention remained fixed on Ren, tracking her position at the edge of the clearing, noting the way she flinched whenever someone addressed her directly, the way she seemed to shrink from the weight of so many eyes upon her. When the meeting finally concluded, the gathered wolves began to disperse, breaking into smaller groups, some departing immediately, others lingering to discuss what they had heard. Kale remained near the stone circle longer than he needed to, watching as Ren was approached by several council members, each asking additional questions, each demanding more details than she had already given. He watched her answer each question with the same quiet patience, her voice never rising, never wavering despite the exhaustion visible on her face. And each time she spoke, Kale felt that same strange, unfamiliar calm settle over him, a sensation so foreign to his usual state of controlled tension that he found himself deliberately staying within earshot just to feel it again. "Alpha King," Edric said, approaching Kale as the crowd continued to thin. "I trust you found the information useful." "I did," Kale said. "Where is she staying?" "The witness." If Edric found the question unusual, he did not show it. She has no pack to return to, and no territory willing to take her in, without questions she cannot yet answer. The council has arranged temporary lodging for her here in the Hollow until we determine the best course of action. Cale's jaw tightened slightly. A witness to a threat this significant, alone and without protection, in a neutral territory that offered safety but no true security. It was, he told himself, a strategic vulnerability. Any enemy capable of erasing entire packs could easily eliminate a single unprotected witness before the council finished its investigation. That arrangement is inadequate, Cale said. She should be under proper protection. Edric raised an eyebrow, studying Cale with the careful, patient expression of someone who had spent decades reading the true intentions behind a wolf's words. Are you offering Alpha King? Cale did not answer immediately. Every instinct honed by years of careful, calculated leadership told him to decline, to leave this matter to the council and return to his own territory, where his responsibilities and his control over his own reactions remained intact. Getting involved in the protection of a witness he barely knew, whose voice had already unsettled him in ways he did not understand, was not a wise use of his time or his resources. And yet, when he opened his mouth to speak, different words came out entirely. Silverfang has the resources to protect her properly, Cale said, and an interest in seeing this threat resolved before it reaches our territory. Edric's expression did not change, but something in his eyes suggested he saw more in Cale's offer than strategic interest alone. I will discuss it with the council, he said, though I suspect Wren herself may have opinions about where she is willing to go. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Wren appeared at the edge of their conversation, having finally extracted herself from the last of the questioning council members. Up close, Cale could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the tension held in her shoulders like a wolf who had not truly rested in months. Forgive me, she said, glancing between Cale and Edric. I couldn't help but overhear. I don't wish to be a burden to anyone. Her voice, even in this brief, uncertain moment, carried the same strange effect on Cale as it had during her testimony. He felt the tension in his own shoulders ease slightly, felt something in his chest loosen that had been wound tight for longer than he could remember. You wouldn't be a burden, Cale said, and he was surprised by how genuine the words sounded even to his own ears. You would be under the protection of the strongest pack in this region. Nothing that erased 3 packs without a trace would dare test Silverfang's borders. Wren studied him for a long moment, her wary eyes searching his face for something, some sign of the true intention behind his offer. Cale held her gaze steadily, though internally, he found himself unusually uncertain of what she might see there, uncertain of what even he was truly offering. I don't know you, Wren said finally, honest in a way that few wolves dared to be with him. Why would the Alpha King concern himself with someone like me? It was a fair question, and Cale found that he did not have a fully honest answer, not one he was willing to say aloud. Because whatever is out there erasing packs is a threat to every territory in this region, including mine, he said instead, and because protecting a witness who can help stop it is simply good strategy. It was true, as far as it went. It simply was not the whole truth. Wren considered this for a long moment, glancing toward Edric, who gave a small, encouraging nod, and then back toward Cale. I would need to trust that your protection comes without conditions, she said carefully. I won't be anyone's prisoner, even if the cage is comfortable. You wouldn't be, Cale said. You would be a guest, free to leave whenever you choose. Something in her expression eased slightly at his words, though the wariness never fully disappeared. Then I accept, she said. Thank you. As she spoke those final words, Cale felt that same strange calm wash over him again. More powerful this time, more undeniable, and he understood, with a certainty that unsettled him more than any battle ever had, that inviting Wren Calloway into his territory was going to change something fundamental about the careful, controlled life he had built for himself. He did not yet know how much, but as he watched her walk away to gather her few belongings for the journey to Silverfang territory, Cale Ashford, the Alpha King who had never lost a fight, who had never shown weakness, who had never needed anyone, felt something inside him shift in a way he could not undo. For the first time in his life, the most powerful wolf alive had found something he could not control. And it was not a rival alpha, or an army, or an unknown enemy erasing packs in the night. It was a voice. Quiet, warm, and utterly unforgettable. And Cale Ashford, against every instinct he had spent his life perfecting, found that he did not want to resist it at all. Wren Calloway had spent the last year of her life learning how to disappear. It was a skill she had never wanted to learn, never asked for, but survival had a way of teaching lessons, whether a person wanted them or not. After her pack vanished, after the weeks of searching led to nothing but empty dens and unanswered questions, Wren had understood one thing, with absolute clarity. Whatever had taken her family could still be out there, and the safest thing she could do was become invisible. She had wandered from territory to territory for months, never staying anywhere long enough to be noticed, never speaking to anyone longer than necessary, keeping her head down and her voice quiet. She learned to read the currents of different packs quickly, to identify which territories were safe to pass through and which held dangers of their own. She learned to hunt alone, to find shelter in places no one else wanted, to survive on the margins of a world that had no place reserved for a wolf without a pack. It was a lonely existence, but Wren had grown almost used to the loneliness, the way a person grows used to a persistent ache that never fully fades but becomes bearable simply through repetition. What she had not grown used to, what she doubted she would ever grow used to, was the fear. It lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, a constant awareness that something out there had erased her entire pack without leaving so much as a footprint behind, and that same something might still be searching for her. She had almost decided not to come to Ashwood Hollow. When the message reached her, carried by a traveling merchant who mentioned the council was gathering to discuss the disappearances in the east, Wren's first instinct had been to keep walking, to put more distance between herself and anyone who might connect her to what had happened. Speaking up meant being seen, and being seen felt like the most dangerous thing a person in her position could do. But then she had thought of the other packs, the ones the merchant mentioned. 2 more vanished since her own family disappeared, and something in her had refused to stay silent any longer. If sharing what little she knew could help prevent even one more pack from suffering the same fate, then her fear was a price worth paying. She had not expected the gathering to be so overwhelming. Dozens of alphas, betas, and elders from packs across the region, each one radiating a kind of power and authority that made Wren feel smaller with every passing minute. She had almost lost her nerve entirely when Edric called her forward, and it had taken every ounce of will she possessed to walk to the center of that stone circle and speak in front of so many powerful wolves. She certainly had not expected to draw the attention of the Alpha King. Wren had heard of Cale Ashford before, of course. Everyone had. His reputation stretched across the entire region, a wolf so powerful and so feared that even packs who had never met him spoke his name with careful respect. She had imagined him, before seeing him in person, as something almost inhuman, a creature built entirely of strength and cold authority, without room for anything softer. Meeting him in person had not entirely dispelled that image. He was exactly as imposing as the stories suggested, tall and powerfully built, with eyes that seemed to see through every carefully constructed wall a person might put up. When he had looked at her during her testimony, Wren had felt it like a physical weight, as though his attention alone carried a kind of pressure most wolves simply did not possess. What she had not expected was his offer of protection. Now, 3 days after the gathering, Wren found herself riding beside Owen, the Alpha King's second in command, on the journey toward Silverfang territory, with Cale riding ahead of them both, his posture straight and unreadable, giving away nothing of his thoughts. She studied the back of his head for a long moment, trying to understand what had prompted a wolf of his reputation to offer protection to a stranger with no pack and no power to offer in return. "You're wondering why he did it," Owen said, apparently noticing her scrutiny. Wren startled slightly, embarrassed to have been caught staring, even if only at the back of someone's head. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," Owen admitted, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Don't worry. Cale doesn't do anything without a reason. If he's decided you're worth protecting, then you are. He said it was strategy, Ren said. Protecting a witness who might help stop whatever is erasing Pax. That's probably part of it, Owen agreed. Kale doesn't waste resources on things that don't matter to Silverfang's security. But I've known him a long time, and I've never seen him offer personal protection to anyone outside our own pack before. Not once. Whatever his reasons are, I don't think strategy is the whole story. Ren considered this, unsure what to make of it. She had spent so long learning to be invisible that the idea of anyone, let alone someone as powerful as the Alpha King, taking a personal interest in her well-being, felt both foreign and faintly alarming. She had learned, through hard experience, that attention from powerful people rarely came without complications. I don't want to be anyone's obligation, she said quietly. I've managed on my own this long. I don't think Kale sees you as an obligation, Owen said. Though I'll admit, I'm not entirely sure what he sees you as. That's new territory for him too. They rode in silence for a while after that, the forest path winding steadily upward as they approached the mountains where Silverfang territory began. Ren found her gaze drifting forward again, toward Kale, watching the easy, controlled way he moved even on horseback, every motion precise and economical, as though he had never once in his life wasted energy on anything unnecessary. She thought about the way he had listened to her testimony at the gathering, his attention fixed and unwavering, in a way that had felt different from the curiosity or suspicion she usually encountered from strangers. She thought about the strange, careful way he had looked at her afterward, and the offer of protection that had come without her fully understanding why. Ren did not know what to make of Kale Ashford, and after a year of learning to read every situation quickly, to identify danger before it arrived, the uncertainty unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. They arrived at the Silverfang stronghold as the sun began to set, painting the mountain fortress in shades of gold and deep orange. Ren had never seen anything quite like it, the towers rising from the stone, like they had grown there naturally, rather than been built, the entire structure radiating a sense of permanence and strength that matched everything she had heard about the pack that called it home. Warriors patrolling the walls straightened as Kale approached, offering respectful nods that he returned with brief, efficient acknowledgement. Ren felt eyes turning toward her as well, curious and evaluating, and she fought the instinct to shrink beneath the attention, reminding herself that she had agreed to this, that she was safe here, at least for now. This way, Kale said, dismounting smoothly and gesturing toward the main entrance of the stronghold. I'll have quarters prepared for you near the eastern wing. It's quieter there, away from the main hall. Thank you, Ren said, following him inside, still trying to take in the sheer scale of the place, the high stone ceilings, the warm light of countless torches lining the corridors, the quiet efficiency of the wolves moving through the halls on various tasks. Kale led her through the stronghold personally, rather than delegating the task to a servant, which Ren noted with quiet surprise. He answered her few questions about the layout of the territory, with more patience than she expected from someone with his reputation, pointing out the dining hall, the training grounds visible from certain windows, the path that led to the surrounding forest where she would be free to walk if she wished, always accompanied by a guard for her own safety. You don't have to escort me yourself, Ren said finally, as they reached the quarters that would apparently be hers for as long as she remained in Silverfang territory. I'm sure the Alpha King has more important matters to attend to. Something flickered across Kale's expression, too quick for Ren to fully read. I wanted to ensure you were settled properly, he said. You'll find guards posted near this wing at all times. If you need anything, they'll see that word reaches me. Thank you, Ren said again, unsure what else to offer someone who had, for reasons she still did not understand, taken it upon himself to see to her safety so personally. Kale studied her for a moment, longer than the conversation strictly required, and Ren found herself holding his gaze despite the instinct that told her to look away, to make herself smaller, to avoid drawing further attention. There was something in his expression she could not quite name, something that looked almost like curiosity, though carefully guarded behind the same controlled exterior he seemed to present to everyone. Rest, Kale said finally. The journey was long. We'll discuss the details of the investigation tomorrow, once you've had time to recover. He left her at the door to her new quarters, And Ren stood there for a long moment after he disappeared down the corridor, trying to make sense of the strange, unsettled feeling in her chest. She had spent a year training herself to distrust kindness from strangers, to look for the hidden cost behind every offer of help, and yet something about Cale Ashford's careful, controlled concern for her well-being did not feel like the calculated strategy he claimed it to be. She pushed the thought aside as she entered her new quarters, a comfortable room with a real bed, something she had not slept in for longer than she cared to admit, and told herself that she was simply exhausted, reading too much into small kindnesses because she was unused to receiving them. But that night, as she finally allowed herself to rest in the safety of the Silverfang stronghold, Ren found her thoughts returning again and again to the strange, quiet moment on the stronghold's threshold, to the careful way Cale Ashford had looked at her, as though trying to solve a puzzle he did not yet have all the pieces to. She did not know, could not have known, that miles away in his own chambers, the Alpha King was lying awake with the exact same thought, turning over the mystery of a stranger's voice, and the strange, undeniable calm it had brought to a heart that had forgotten, until now, that it was even capable of feeling unsettled. The days that followed fell into an unfamiliar rhythm for both of them, one neither had quite expected. Cale found reasons, each one carefully justified by matters of security or investigation, to seek Ren out throughout the following week. He told himself each time that the visits were necessary, that gathering additional details about the disappearances required regular conversation with the only witness who had survived them. He told himself the same thing when he found himself lingering longer than the conversation strictly required, when he found himself remembering the exact cadence of her voice long after she had finished speaking. Ren, for her part, found herself growing less guarded around him with each passing day, though she could not have explained exactly why. There was something about Cale Ashford that did not match the fearsome reputation she had heard before ever meeting him. He was direct, sometimes even blunt, but never cruel. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, in a way that few people ever had, weighing her words with the same careful attention he seemed to give every matter of importance to his territory. She learned, slowly, that the cold, controlled exterior the Alpha King presented to the world was not the whole truth of who he was, merely the armor he had built around himself through years of leading a pack that demanded strength above all else. She began to notice the small moments when that armor slipped, just slightly, when something she said drew a flicker of genuine interest across his face, when the careful control in his voice softened almost imperceptibly during their quieter conversations. And Cale, though he would never have admitted it aloud, began to understand something about himself that unsettled him more than any battle ever had. The strange calm he felt in Ren's presence was not fading with familiarity, as he had half expected, half hoped it might. If anything, it was growing stronger, deepening into something he did not yet have a name for, something that felt dangerously close to a need he had spent his entire life training himself never to feel. Neither of them spoke of it directly, not yet. But something had shifted in the quiet spaces between them, something neither the Alpha King nor the girl with no pack fully understood, and neither of them was entirely certain they wanted to. The gathering at the edge of Silverfang territory had grown tense long before Cale arrived, and the moment his horse cleared the tree line, he understood why. 3 wolves stood at the border marker, their postures rigid, their eyes darting between the Silverfang guards who had intercepted them and the forest behind them, as though they expected something to emerge from the shadows at any moment. Cale recognized none of them, which itself was unusual. He knew the faces of every pack within 100 miles of his territory, every alpha, every notable warrior. These 3 wore no markings he could place, no colors belonging to any pack he had ever encountered. "Alpha King," said Garrick, the guard who had sent word for Cale to come personally. "They claimed to have information about the disappearances. Said they wouldn't speak to anyone but you." Cale dismounted and approached the strangers, his warriors falling into position around him without needing to be told. The eldest of the 3, a gray-haired man with a scar running the length of his jaw, stepped forward, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "We don't have much time," the man said. "They'll know we're gone soon." "Who will know?" Cale asked, his voice carrying the same flat authority he used with every threat, though something in the stranger's fear made him uneasy, in a way most confrontations did not. "We came from the packs your witness spoke of," the man said. "The ones that vanished. We weren't taken with the others. We were away when it happened, same as her. We've been hiding ever since, moving from place to place, trying to understand what took our families." Cale's attention sharpened. "You know what it was?" The man exchanged a glance with his companions before answering. "We know it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a rival pack. We found tracks, once, near the last place it struck. Not wolf tracks. Not human tracks either. Something else." "Show me," Cale said. The man hesitated, then reached into a worn leather satchel and produced a rough sketch drawn on a scrap of hide, depicting a print unlike anything Cale had ever seen, elongated and clawed in a pattern that belonged to no creature native to these lands. "There's more," the second stranger said, a younger woman with haunted eyes. "We heard something, the night before our pack vanished. A sound carried on the wind, like a voice, but wrong somehow, calling names. Everyone who left their dens that night and followed that sound never came back." A cold understanding began to settle over Cale as he listened, a voice that called wolves away from safety, luring them into the darkness where something waited to erase them entirely. It was too close, too eerily similar to the strange effect Ren's voice had on him, and though he knew instinctively that the comparison was different, that Ren's voice offered calm rather than danger, the parallel unsettled him deeply. "Why come to me now?" Cale asked. "Why not the council?" "Because you have her," the older man said. "The witness. And because you're the strongest pack in this region. If whatever is out there is planning to move against Silverfang next, you deserve warning." Cale studied the three strangers for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in their exhausted, frightened faces against the possibility of deception. Every instinct honed through years of leadership told him to remain cautious, but something about their fear felt too genuine to dismiss. "You'll stay here," Cale said finally, "under my protection, until the council can properly investigate what you've told me. If this threat is real, Silverfang will not wait passively for it to arrive." The strangers accepted the offer with visible relief, and Cale left instructions with Garrick to see them settled, before returning to the stronghold himself, his mind heavy with the weight of what he had just learned. He found Ren in the small garden near the eastern wing, where she had taken to spending her afternoons among the herbs and flowers that grew there, one of the few places in the stronghold where she seemed to fully relax. She looked up as he approached, and something in his expression must have betrayed the seriousness of what had happened, because her own face immediately shifted into concern. "What's wrong?" she asked. Cale told her everything, watching carefully as she absorbed the information, watching the way her hands tightened around the fabric of her sleeves as he described the strange tracks, the voice that lured wolves into the darkness. By the time he finished, her face had gone pale, and she had wrapped her arms around herself in the same protective posture he remembered from their first meeting at Ashwood Hollow. "A voice," she repeated quietly, "calling names." "You never mentioned that detail before," Cale said. "Because I never heard it," Ren said. "I wasn't there that night. I only know what I found when I returned." She paused, her expression troubled. "But it makes sense, in a terrible way. Something that could erase an entire pack without a fight would need a way to draw them out first. A voice that couldn't be resisted would do exactly that." Cale felt something cold settle in his chest at her words, an unwelcome thought forming that he could not quite push away. If whatever was responsible for the disappearances used an irresistible voice to lure its victims to their doom, and Ren possessed a voice with an equally undeniable, inexplicable pull, was it possible the two things were connected in some way neither of them yet understood? He did not voice the thought aloud, unwilling to plant that fear in her mind, without more certainty, but he filed it away, another piece of a puzzle that was growing more complicated with each new discovery. "I want to increase the guard around the eastern wing," Cale said instead. "And I want you to stay within the stronghold's walls until we understand more about what we're dealing with." Ren nodded, though Cale could see the frustration beneath her agreement, the discomfort of someone who had already spent a year running and hiding, now being asked to accept confinement again, even for her own protection. "I know it's not easy," Cale said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his own voice. but I won't risk losing the only person who might help us understand what's happening." Ren looked up at him, something shifting in her expression at his words, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet garden around them suddenly feeling smaller, more intimate than it had a few minutes before. "You keep saying things like that," Ren said finally. "Like I matter beyond what I can tell you about the investigation." Kale did not answer immediately, uncertain how to explain something he barely understood himself. "You do matter," he said finally, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar in his mouth, an admission he had never made to anyone in longer than he could remember. "Beyond the investigation." Ren's breath caught slightly, and Kale watched a flush of color rise in her cheeks, watched her look away first, unable to hold his gaze any longer. He understood the feeling. Something about this conversation had crossed a line neither of them had acknowledged before, moving them into territory that had nothing to do with strategy or protection, and everything to do with the strange, undeniable pull that had existed between them since the moment she first spoke at Ashwood Hollow. "I should return to my duties," Kale said, retreating to the safety of formality, even as every instinct told him to stay. "I'll have Owen assign additional guards before nightfall." He left before she could respond, walking back toward the main hall with his usual controlled stride, though his mind remained fixed entirely on the garden he had just left behind, on the flush of color in Ren's cheeks, on the strange, unfamiliar warmth still spreading through his chest. Later that evening, Kale called a private meeting with Owen and his most trusted advisors to discuss the information gathered from the 3 strangers who had arrived at the border. The stone map room, usually reserved for matters of war and territory disputes, felt appropriately serious for the gravity of what they now faced. "An enemy that can erase entire packs without leaving a trace," Owen said, studying the map spread across the central table, marked with the locations of the 3 vanished packs along the eastern border, and uses some kind of voice to lure its victims. "That's the theory," Kale confirmed. "Unconfirmed, but consistent with everything we've gathered so far." "You think it's connected to Ren?" Owen said, not quite a question. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't know what to think yet. But the timing of her survival, combined with the nature of her own voice, is a coincidence I'm not comfortable ignoring." "You don't think she's involved?" Owen said, watching Kale carefully. "No," Kale said, more firmly than he intended. "I think she's a target, same as the packs that vanished. But I need to understand why her voice affects people the way it does before I can rule out any connection to what's happening." The advisors exchanged glances, and one of the elder wolves, a woman named Iris who had served as an advisor since Kale's father's reign, spoke up carefully. "Alpha King, there are old stories about bloodlines with voices that hold power beyond ordinary wolves. Voices that can calm, or command, or in the wrong circumstances, be twisted into something dangerous." Kale's attention sharpened. "Tell me." "They're old legends, Alpha King, half forgotten even among our own elders. Bloodlines said to carry a gift passed down through generations, capable of soothing even the most powerful wolves, or in darker versions of the story, capable of luring prey to their doom. Most consider them myths. Most considered the missing packs a coincidence too, until it happened 3 times, Kale said. I want everything you can find on these legends. Every record, every story, no matter how old or unreliable it seems." Iris nodded and departed to begin the search, and the rest of the meeting continued late into the night, planning increased patrols, coordinating with the council about the stranger's testimony, preparing Silverfang's defenses against a threat they still did not fully understand. By the time Kale finally retired to his own chambers, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but sleep did not come easily. His mind kept circling back to the same unresolved question, the same uncomfortable possibility that Ren's extraordinary voice might be tied to the very danger threatening to reach his territory. He told himself that whatever the truth turned out to be, his resolve to protect her would not change. But even as he made that promise to himself, some quieter, more honest part of him recognized that his feelings toward Ren Calloway had already grown far beyond the careful boundaries of strategic protection, into territory that made the coming days feel more dangerous and more uncertain than any battle he had ever faced. 3 days later, Iris returned with a leather-bound book so old its pages had turned brittle and yellow, carefully protected within a wrapped cloth as though even the air itself might damage it further. She found Cale in the map room, reviewing reports from his Eastern scouts, and set the book carefully on the table before him. "I found something, Alpha King," she said. "A record from before even your grandfather's time. It speaks of a bloodline called the Calloway line, said to be blessed, or cursed depending on the telling, with a voice capable of settling even the fiercest wolf's inner beast." Cale's hand stilled over the reports he had been studying. "Calloway. The same name as your guest," Iris confirmed. "The stories say the bloodline was thought extinct, wiped out generations ago, during a conflict the old records don't fully explain. If Wren Calloway carries that bloodline, Alpha King, then her voice isn't merely unusual, it's exactly what the legends describe." Cale opened the book carefully, scanning the faded, careful handwriting that described a gift passed down through generations of a single family, a voice capable of calming even the most volatile alpha, said in some versions of the legend, to be fated to bond with the most powerful wolf of each generation, settling the beast within him in a way nothing else ever could. "Fated," Cale repeated quietly, an uncomfortable weight settling in his chest at the word. He had never believed in fate, had built his entire life around the principle that strength and choice determined a wolf's destiny, not some predetermined bond written into old, half-forgotten legends. And yet the description in front of him matched exactly what he had experienced since the moment Wren first spoke at Ashwood Hollow. A calm he could not explain, a pull he could not resist, no matter how carefully he tried to maintain his usual control. "There's more," Iris said gently. "The legend also describes danger surrounding bloodlines like this one. Voices with this kind of power attract attention, Alpha King, not only from those who wish to benefit from the bond, but from those who wish to exploit it, or eliminate it entirely, out of fear or greed." Cale closed the book slowly, his mind working through the implications with the same careful precision he applied to every strategic threat, though this particular threat felt far more personal than anything he had faced before. If the legends were true, Wren's rare bloodline explained not only the strange effect her voice had on him, but potentially the reason her pack, and the others near her, had been targeted and erased. Someone, or something, might be hunting bloodlines like hers specifically, either to claim the power for themselves, or to ensure it never bonded with a wolf strong enough to use it. And if that was true, then bringing Wren to Silverfang, rather than protecting her, might have painted an even larger target on her back, one that could now threaten not just her, but his entire territory as well. Cale rose from the table, the weight of this new understanding settling heavily across his shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever danger this revelation invited toward his territory, one thing had become absolutely clear in his mind. He was not going to let anything, legend or otherwise, take Wren Calloway the way it had taken everyone else she had ever loved. Cale found Wren in the training yard the next morning, watching a group of young warriors practice their sparring under the careful direction of one of his senior fighters. She sat on a low stone wall at the edge of the yard, her expression thoughtful, and Cale noted, not for the first time, how easily she seemed to have settled into small corners of daily life within the stronghold, even while remaining wary of its more powerful residents. "I need to speak with you," Cale said, taking a seat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "About something Iris discovered." Wren turned to face him, immediately reading the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Cale told her everything, the old book, the legend of the Calloway bloodline, the description of a voice capable of settling the most powerful wolves, the darker possibility that her family's rare gift might be exactly what had drawn danger to her pack in the first place. He watched her expression shift through surprise, confusion, and finally, a kind of quiet, painful understanding, as the pieces of her own mysterious past began to align with a story far older than she had ever imagined. "My mother used to sing to me," Wren said slowly, almost to herself, as though pulling the memory up from somewhere she had not visited in a long time. "Even when I was very young, she said my voice had something special in it. She never explained what she meant. I always assumed she was just being kind, the way mothers often are. She may have known more than she told you," Cale said gently. "Perhaps to protect you, in case the wrong person learned what you were." Ren's hands tightened in her lap, and Kale saw the moment the full weight of the revelation settled over her, the realization that her family might have been targeted not randomly, but specifically, because of a bloodline she had never fully understood. "If this is true," Ren said, her voice unsteady for the first time since Kale had known her, "then it's my fault. Whatever took my pack, it was looking for someone like me. My mother, my father, everyone I loved. They might still be alive if I hadn't existed at all." "No," Kale said, more forcefully than he intended, turning to face her fully. "Whatever attacked your pack made a choice to hunt something it wanted, something it believed it had a right to take. That choice belongs to them, not to you. You didn't choose this bloodline, and you certainly didn't choose to lose everyone you loved because of it." Ren looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something neither had fully acknowledged before. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Ren asked finally, her voice quiet. "My history, my bloodline, whatever this legend claims about people like me. Why does the Alpha King care this deeply about someone who arrived at his stronghold with nothing to offer but a warning?" Kale considered the question carefully, aware that his answer mattered more than almost anything he had said to her before. He thought of the legend Iris had shown him, the description of a voice fated to bond with the most powerful wolf of each generation, settling the beast within, in a way nothing else ever could. He thought of every moment since Ashwood Hollow, when Ren's presence had unraveled the careful control he had spent his entire life building, and how, despite every instinct that told him to resist it, some part of him had never truly wanted to. "Because from the moment you spoke at that gathering, something in me changed," Kale said, the admission feeling both dangerous and inevitable. "I don't fully understand it. I've spent my life training myself not to need anything, not to feel anything I couldn't control. And then I heard your voice, and for the first time, I felt something I couldn't force myself to ignore." Ren stared at him, clearly startled by the raw honesty in his words, honesty that Kale himself was still adjusting to, unaccustomed to speaking so openly about anything, let alone something as vulnerable as this. "I don't know what this bloodline legend means for either of us," Kale continued. "I don't know if what I feel is fate, or simply the truth of who you are as a person, but I know that whatever is hunting bloodlines like yours will have to go through me before it ever touches you again." Ren's breath caught, and for a long moment, she simply looked at him, something shifting behind her wary eyes, a fragile hope beginning to form where fear had lived for so long. "I've spent a year believing I would always be alone," Ren said softly. "That anyone who got close to me would eventually be in danger because of it." "You're not alone anymore," Kale said, "and you're not in this alone either." Before either of them could say anything further, the peace of the moment was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Owen appeared at the edge of the training yard, his expression grim, and Kale immediately rose to his feet, recognizing the urgency in his second's posture. "What's happened?" Kale asked. "Scouts spotted movement near the eastern border," Owen said. "Strange tracks, the same kind the strangers described. And Alpha King, one of the border villages, reported hearing something last night. A voice, carried on the wind." Ren rose beside Kale, her face going pale. "The same as what happened before. It's moving toward Silverfang territory," Owen confirmed. "Whatever it is, it's not staying in the east anymore." Kale's expression hardened into the focused, controlled intensity that had earned him his reputation as the most feared alpha in the region. "Double the patrols along the eastern border immediately. I want every warrior on alert by nightfall." Owen nodded and departed to relay the orders, leaving Kale and Ren alone once more in the training yard, though the fragile intimacy of their earlier conversation had been replaced entirely by the cold weight of an approaching threat. "It's coming here," Ren said quietly, "because of me. It's coming here because it made a choice to hunt something it has no right to claim," Kale said firmly, "and it's about to learn exactly what happens to anything that threatens Silverfang territory." Ren looked up at him, and despite the fear evident in her expression, something steadier had settled there as well, a resolve that Kale recognized because he had seen it in the eyes of every warrior who had ever chosen to stand and fight rather than run. "Then let me help," Ren said. "Whatever this is, Whatever my voice means, if it's the reason those packs were targeted, then maybe it's also the key to understanding how to stop it. I won't hide while others fight a battle that started because of me." Kale studied her for a long moment, torn between the instinct to protect her by keeping her as far from danger as possible, and the growing understanding that Wren Calloway was not the fragile, frightened wolf he had first perceived at Ashwood Hollow. She had survived a year of loss and isolation through sheer resilience, and the strength beneath her quiet exterior deserved more respect than his protective instincts wanted to allow. "We'll face it together," Kale said finally, "but you'll follow every precaution I set. This threat has already proven it can erase entire packs without warning. I won't lose you to carelessness." Wren nodded, and for the first time since arriving at Silverfang, Kale saw something in her expression that looked less like fear and more like determination, the look of someone finally ready to stop running and start fighting back. As the sun began to set that evening, casting long shadows across the stronghold's walls, Kale stood on the same balcony where he had first read the letter summoning him to Ashwood Hollow, looking out over the darkening forest that stretched toward the eastern border. Somewhere out there, something was moving through the shadows, drawn perhaps by the very presence of the woman who had, in a matter of weeks, unraveled every careful wall he had built around his heart. He did not know yet what waited in the darkness, or how the ancient legend of the Calloway bloodline would ultimately play into the danger closing in around them. But he knew, with a certainty that had settled into his bones since the moment Wren agreed to come to Silverfang, that he would face whatever came next without hesitation, without the careful detachment that had defined his entire reign. For the first time in his life, Kale Ashford had something worth protecting, beyond his own territory, beyond his own reputation, and he intended to make certain that whatever hunted bloodlines like hers would learn, in the most decisive way possible, exactly what it meant to threaten something the Alpha King had chosen to call his own. The eastern border erupted into chaos 2 nights later. A scout named Derek came sprinting into the stronghold, just past midnight, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a fear Kale had rarely seen on any of his warriors. Kale was already awake, unable to sleep with the tension of the past days pressing on him, and he met Derek in the main hall before the young scout had even fully caught his breath. "Report," Kale said sharply. "Alpha King, the border village of Fen Creek," Derek gasped. "Something attacked. Not a fight, not tracks like before. People just started walking into the forest. Whole families, following something none of the rest of us could hear." Kale's blood ran cold. "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more, before we managed to pull the rest back inside their homes and barricade the doors. We lost sight of everyone who wandered off before we understood what was happening." Kale turned immediately, shouting orders that brought warriors pouring from every corridor of the stronghold, assembling with the speed and discipline that had made Silverfang the most formidable pack in the region. Owen arrived within minutes, already half-dressed for battle, his expression grim with the same understanding that had settled over Kale the moment Derek finished speaking. "It's here," Owen said, "sooner than we expected." "Assemble a force," Kale ordered. "We ride for Fen Creek immediately. I want trackers ahead of the main group, and I want Iris and 2 guards stationed outside Wren's chambers until I return." "You're not bringing her?" Owen asked, surprised. "Not into an active threat we don't fully understand," Kale said firmly. "If this thing is hunting her specifically, the last thing I'll do is walk her directly into its path." Owen nodded and moved to relay the orders, but before Kale could follow, a voice stopped him at the edge of the hall. "Kale." He turned to find Wren standing at the top of the staircase, already dressed, her expression set with the same steady resolve he had noticed growing in her over the past days. She must have heard the commotion and dressed quickly, unwilling to be left uninformed of whatever crisis had erupted in the middle of the night. "Go back to your chambers," Kale said, though even as he spoke the words, he recognized the futility of the command. "Fen Creek," Wren said. "I heard Derek. People are being lured away, just like before, which is exactly why you're staying here," Kale said, "where you're safe. Kale, if this is connected to my bloodline, I might be able to help understand what's happening. I might recognize something, hear something in whatever is calling them that could give us an advantage. Or you might become exactly what it's hunting, delivered directly into its reach," Kale countered, his voice sharper than he intended, fear for her safety cutting through his usual composed authority. Ren crossed the distance between them, stopping close enough that Kale could see the determination burning steadily beneath her fear. I've spent a year hiding from this, Kale. Running, staying silent, letting fear decide every choice I made. I won't do that anymore. Not when people are in danger right now because of whatever this creature wants from someone like me. Kale searched her face, torn between every protective instinct screaming at him to lock her safely within the stronghold's walls, and the growing respect he held for her refusal to remain a passive victim in her own story. He thought of the legend Iris had shown him, the description of a bond fated to settle the beast within the most powerful wolf of each generation, and wondered, not for the first time, whether resisting that fate was even something within his power. You stay behind the main force at all times, Kale said finally, the words costing him more than he expected. You do not approach whatever we find without my explicit order. If I tell you to retreat, you retreat immediately. No argument. Understood, Ren said, relief and determination mixing in her expression. They rode for Fen Creek within the hour, a force of Silverfang's finest warriors moving swiftly through the darkened forest, torches casting flickering light against the ancient trees that seemed to press in closer with every passing mile. Ren rode near the center of the group, flanked by guards Kale had personally selected for their skill and loyalty, while he rode ahead with Owen and the lead trackers, his senses stretched taut for any sign of the threat that had already claimed a dozen lives from the village ahead. They reached Fen Creek as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, and the scene that greeted them confirmed every fear Kale had carried throughout the journey. Homes stood empty, doors left open, belongings scattered as though their owners had walked away mid-task, drawn by something too compelling to resist. The remaining villagers, those who had been forcibly restrained, or who had simply not heard whatever call lured the others away, huddled together near the center of the settlement, their faces pale with terror and grief. Kale dismounted and moved quickly through the wreckage of the village, his warriors fanning out to search for any trace of where the missing villagers had gone. The trail, when they found it, led directly into the deep forest to the east, disappearing into terrain so thick and shadowed that even Kale's most experienced trackers struggled to follow it with any confidence. Alpha King, one of his trackers called, kneeling beside a set of prints in the soft earth near the tree line. These matched the description from the strangers. Kale crouched beside the tracker, studying the elongated, clawed print pressed deep into the ground, exactly as the old, worn sketch had described. Whatever moved through this forest was neither wolf nor ordinary creature, and the depth of the print suggested something considerably larger and heavier than any predator native to these lands. Behind him, he heard Ren's sharp intake of breath, and turned to find she had dismounted despite his instructions, drawn forward by something that had caught her attention near the edge of the clearing. Ren, stay back, Kale warned. I hear something, Ren said, her voice tight with tension. Not with my ears exactly. Something else, like a pull, toward the trees. Kale's chest tightened with alarm. Get her back to the horses, he ordered the nearest guard, but before the command could be carried out, Ren shook her head firmly. No, wait. I need to understand this. She closed her eyes, concentrating on the strange sensation pulling at her attention, and Kale watched, every muscle tensed and ready to intervene the moment anything seemed to threaten her safety. It's testing, Ren said finally, opening her eyes, her expression troubled. Whatever this is, it's not actively calling right now, but I can feel something searching, reaching out toward anything with a voice like mine. It's how it found my pack. It's how it found the others. It's searching for something specific, and I think it just found me. A chill swept through the clearing as her words settled over the gathered warriors. Kale moved immediately to her side, positioning himself between Ren and the deep forest where the trail disappeared, his hand resting protectively at her back. We're leaving, Kale said firmly. Now. Kale, if it knows I'm here, then we've confirmed exactly what we needed to know, and we're not going to give it the chance to act on that knowledge tonight, Kale said. We regroup, we prepare properly, and we face this threat on our terms, not while it holds the advantage of surprise in unfamiliar territory. Ren did not argue further, allowing Kale to guide her back toward the horses, while his warriors continued the grim work of comforting the surviving villagers and preparing to escort them back to the safety of the Silverfang stronghold. As they rode back through the lightning forest, the weight of what they had discovered settled heavily over the entire company. Whatever hunted the Calloway bloodline had found Ren, and it was only a matter of time before it decided to act. Cale spent the following days in constant motion, coordinating with the council to share what Silverfang had discovered at Fen Creek, strengthening the stronghold's defenses with a thoroughness that left little room for any vulnerability, and personally overseeing the training of additional warriors in preparation for whatever confrontation lay ahead. Iris continued her research into the old legends, uncovering fragments of additional stories that described previous encounters between the Calloway bloodline and the very same kind of creature now hunting Ren, though none of the ancient records offered a clear method for defeating it. Through it all, Cale found himself returning to Ren's company whenever his duties allowed, drawn by a pull he no longer tried to deny even to himself. Their conversations grew longer, more open, moving beyond the careful boundaries of strategy and investigation into something far more personal. Ren told him about her childhood, about her mother's careful, quiet warmth, and her father's steady strength, about the family she had lost, and the year of loneliness that had followed. Cale, in turn, found himself sharing pieces of his own past he had never spoken aloud to anyone. The weight of his father's failed reign, the isolation of building Silverfang into an unbreakable fortress, at the cost of every softer connection he might have otherwise allowed himself. Neither of them acknowledged directly what was growing between them, though it lived in every lingering glance, every moment of comfortable silence that no longer felt like the careful distance of strangers, but the easy quiet of two people who had begun to trust each other completely. It was Owen who finally addressed it, catching Cale alone in the map room late one evening, poring over reports from the eastern border, with an intensity that had become his constant companion since the attack on Fen Creek. "You've changed," Owen said, settling into the chair across from him without invitation. "We're facing a threat unlike anything we've dealt with before," Cale said, not looking up from the reports. "Of course I've changed. Every wolf under my command needs to be ready for what's coming." "That's not what I mean, and you know it," Owen said. "I've served beside you for a decade, Cale. I've never once seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Cale finally set down the reports, meeting Owen's steady gaze with the same directness he had used with every difficult truth throughout his reign. "I don't know what to do with what I feel, Owen. I've spent my entire life believing that strength meant needing nothing, no one. And now there's a wolf under my protection, who has undone every wall I ever built, and I can't find it in myself to regret it, even with everything we're facing." "Then don't regret it," Owen said simply. "You've spent 10 years being the strongest alpha this region has ever seen, Cale. Maybe it's time you let yourself be something else too, not instead of that strength, alongside it." Cale considered his second's words for a long moment, the weight of years spent in careful, controlled isolation settling differently now, no longer feeling like the necessary armor he had always believed it to be, but something closer to a burden he was finally ready to set down, at least in part. "Whatever hunts her bloodline will come for her again," Cale said quietly, "and when it does, I intend to be standing beside her, not behind a wall of careful distance." "Good," Owen said, rising from his chair, "because I don't think that wall would hold much longer anyway, not against a voice like hers." Owen left him alone with his thoughts, and Cale sat in the quiet map room for a long while afterward, watching the candlelight flicker across the borders of his territory, marked carefully across the ancient map, and understanding, with a clarity that felt both freeing and terrifying, that the Alpha King, who had once believed himself invincible, had finally found something more important than his own carefully guarded strength. He had found something worth protecting with everything he had, even if that meant admitting, for the first time in his life, that he was no longer willing to face the world entirely alone. Not every threat facing Silverfang came from the shadows of the eastern forest. Word of Cale's growing attachment to Ren had spread quickly through the political circles that connected every pack in the region, carried by messengers and traders who noticed how differently the Alpha King now conducted himself, how personally involved he had become in protecting a witness with no pack and no political standing of her own. Among the rival alphas who had long resented Silverfang's dominance, this shift was seen not as a personal matter, but as an opportunity. Victor Hale, alpha of the Ironclaw pack, and one of the few leaders in the region whose ambition rivaled Cale's own strength, called a private meeting with his most trusted advisors within a week of hearing the rumors. Ironclaw territory bordered Silverfang's southern edge, and for years, Victor had watched Cale's power grow with the careful, patient resentment of a wolf who believed he deserved the same respect and had never quite managed to earn it. An unprotected weakness, Victor said, pacing before his advisors in the dim light of his own stronghold, the great Alpha King, undone by a woman with no pack, no lineage worth speaking of, no power beyond a voice that apparently makes him foolish. You believe this changes things between our territories? Asked his advisor, a calculating wolf named Derek, who had served Victor faithfully for years. I believe, Victor said, that a wolf distracted by matters of the heart is a wolf who has stopped watching his borders with the same vigilance that made Silverfang untouchable for a decade. And I believe that if the rumors about her bloodline are true, whoever controls that voice controls something far more valuable than mere political leverage. You want to move against her, Derek said, understanding immediately. I want to test the theory, Victor said, a cold smile spreading across his face. If the Calloway bloodline truly carries the power the old legends describe, imagine what such a gift could accomplish in the hands of an alpha willing to use it properly, rather than wasting it on sentiment the way Cale Ashford apparently intends to. The plan Victor devised over the following days was careful and patient, designed to exploit the very vulnerability that had begun to define Cale's reign since Ren's arrival. Rather than a direct assault on Silverfang territory, which even Victor knew would be suicide against Cale's forces, he began cultivating relationships with lesser figures within the region, gathering information, watching for the smallest opportunity to separate Ren from the protection that surrounded her at every turn. That opportunity arrived nearly 2 weeks later, when the council announced a second gathering at Ashwood Hollow, this time to formally organize a joint response to the disappearances that had now claimed victims from 3 different territories. As a witness central to the investigation, Ren's presence was requested once again, and despite Cale's private reservations about exposing her to a large, unpredictable gathering of wolves from across the region, the political necessity of cooperation left him little choice but to agree. I don't like this, Cale said, the night before their departure, as he reviewed the security arrangements with Owen for what felt like the 10th time. Too many unknown wolves gathered in one place. Too many opportunities for something to go wrong. Ashwood Hollow is neutral territory, Owen reminded him. Protected by ancient agreement, no violence is permitted within its borders. Agreements can be broken by those desperate or foolish enough to try, Cale said. And I don't trust every alpha attending this gathering to respect neutral ground when the prize is powerful enough. Despite his concerns, Cale understood the necessity of the gathering, and the following morning, he departed for Ashwood Hollow with a larger escort than before, Ren riding close beside him, rather than trailing behind with the rest of the company, unwilling to allow any distance between them that might create an opening for whatever danger continued to circle at the edges of his awareness. The gathering at Ashwood Hollow proved even larger than the first. Representatives from nearly every pack in the region assembled to discuss the growing threat and coordinate a unified response. Cale remained close to Ren throughout the proceedings, his usual controlled distance from her replaced by a protectiveness that drew curious glances from the gathered alphas, several of whom exchanged knowing looks that confirmed the rumors circulating through the region had indeed reached every corner of wolf society. Victor Hale arrived midway through the gathering, greeting Cale with the practiced cordiality of a rival who had spent years perfecting the art of appearing friendly while calculating every advantage available to him. Alpha King, Victor said, his smile not quite reaching his cold eyes. And this must be the witness everyone has been discussing. Ren Calloway, is it? Your testimony at the last gathering was quite remarkable. Ren offered a polite, cautious greeting, and Cale felt his own instincts sharpen immediately at Victor's attention, recognizing something calculating beneath the Ironclaw Alpha's carefully pleasant demeanor. The council has much to discuss today, Cale said, deliberately steering the conversation away from Ren. I'm sure you'll want to hear the latest reports from the eastern border. Of course, Victor said smoothly, though his gaze lingered on Ren a moment longer than Kale liked before he finally turned to join the gathering proper. The council meeting stretched through most of the day. Alphas from a dozen territories debating strategy, sharing information gathered from their own investigations, and gradually forming a coordinated plan to increase patrols and share resources along every border where the disappearances had occurred. Ren was called upon twice to clarify details from her earlier testimony, and each time, Kale watched the gathered crowd fall into the same rapt silence her voice had commanded before, watched Victor's expression grow more calculating with each passing moment. It was during a brief recess, as the gathering broke for a meal before continuing into the evening, that Victor's true intentions finally began to reveal themselves. Kale had stepped away briefly to consult with Edric about additional security measures for the journey home, leaving Ren under the watchful protection of two Silverfang guards positioned nearby. When he returned only minutes later, he found Victor engaged in what appeared to be an innocent conversation with Ren, though the guards flanking her had grown visibly tense. Such a remarkable gift, Victor was saying as Kale approached. It seems a shame that the Calloway bloodline has been so isolated, so unprotected, when there are those among us who could offer it the kind of security and respect it truly deserves. I'm well protected where I am, Ren said, her voice carrying a wariness Kale recognized immediately, the same guarded caution she had shown him during their first meeting. Of course, Victor said, his smile widening slightly. Though I wonder if the Alpha King's attention is driven more by strategy or by something more personal. Powerful men often confuse the two, don't you find? It might be worth considering whether your interests are truly protected or simply useful to someone else's larger ambitions. That's enough, Kale said, his voice cutting sharply through the conversation as he stepped directly between Victor and Ren, his presence radiating a controlled fury that made even the confident Ironclaw Alpha take a half step back. Alpha King, Victor said, recovering his composure quickly. I was simply making conversation with our gathering's most valuable witness. You were attempting to plant doubt where none belongs, Kale said, his voice low and dangerous. I suggest you find somewhere else to direct your attention, Victor, before this conversation becomes something you'll regret. Victor held Kale's gaze for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind his eyes, before he offered a shallow, mocking bow and retreated back toward the gathering, though Kale did not miss the way his gaze lingered on Ren one final time before he disappeared into the crowd. Are you all right? Kale asked, turning to Ren immediately, his hand finding hers without conscious thought, needing the physical reassurance that she remained safely beside him. I'm fine, Ren said, though her voice carried a tremor that suggested otherwise. He was testing something, wasn't he? Trying to see how I would react, or perhaps trying to plant doubt about your intentions. Victor Hale has coveted Silverfang's territory for years, Kale said grimly. If he's learned about the legend of your bloodline, he'll see you as an opportunity, not a person worth protecting. You think he might try to take me, Ren said, understanding settling over her features. I think we need to be far more careful than we have been, Kale said. From this point forward, you don't leave my sight during this gathering, and the moment the council's business concludes, we return to Silverfang immediately. The remainder of the gathering passed with Kale maintaining a constant, watchful presence beside Ren, his usual careful diplomacy replaced by an edge of barely restrained protectiveness that left little doubt among the assembled alphas about the true nature of his feelings toward the witness he had sworn to protect. Victor made no further direct approach, though Kale noticed him watching from across the clearing on several occasions, his expression unreadable, but his intentions, Kale suspected, far from abandoned. As the sun began to set and the council finally adjourned for the day, agreeing to reconvene the following morning to finalize their coordinated response, Kale gathered his escort and prepared for the journey back to Silverfang rather than remaining overnight in the Hollow as originally planned, unwilling to risk another night in territory where Victor's influence might extend beyond the neutral ground's careful protections. You're worried, Ren observed, as they rode away from Ashwood Hollow beneath a sky just beginning to darken toward evening. I'm cautious, Kale corrected. Victor Hale does not make idle conversation. Whatever he was testing today, he'll act on what he learned eventually, and I intend to be prepared when he does." Ren fell silent for a moment, studying the darkening forest around them with an expression that suggested she was working through something in her own mind. "He said something about your interests being strategy rather than personal. I didn't believe him, but I wondered." Ren. Kale brought his horse to a stop, forcing hers to halt alongside his, and turned to face her directly, wanting no doubt to linger between them, not after everything Victor had attempted to plant. "Whatever began as strategy disappeared a long time ago. What I feel for you has nothing to do with your bloodline, or the legend, or any advantage it might offer Silverfang. It has everything to do with you." Ren studied his face in the fading light, searching for any trace of deception, and finding none. Something in her expression softened into an openness Kale had not seen from her before, a trust finally settling fully into place after weeks of careful, guarded caution. "I believe you," she said quietly. They continued the journey back to Silverfang, in comfortable silence after that, though Kale's mind remained sharp with awareness of the new threat Victor Hale represented, understanding that whatever danger already circled Ren from the shadows of the eastern forest had now been joined by an equally dangerous threat closer to home, one wearing the polite mask of a fellow alpha rather than the terrifying unknown of an ancient hunter. Both threats, Kale understood with growing certainty, were converging on the same target, and he intended to make absolutely certain that neither one succeeded in taking her from him. Victor Hale did not waste time once his suspicions about the Calloway bloodline were confirmed. Within days of the gathering at Ashwood Hollow, he began quietly reaching out to contacts across the region, some legitimate allies of the Ironclaw pack, others far less reputable figures, who operated in the shadowy spaces between territories where the Council's authority held little sway. His goal was simple in concept, though complicated in execution: find a way to separate Ren from Kale's protection long enough to claim the bloodline's power for himself, either by convincing her that Ironclaw offered greater safety than Silverfang, or by force, if persuasion failed. He found his opening through Derek, whose network of informants had, over the following 2 weeks, gathered valuable intelligence about the rhythms of daily life within the Silverfang stronghold. They learned of Ren's habit of walking in the garden near the eastern wing each afternoon, of the guard rotations that protected the stronghold's perimeter, of the reduced escort that typically accompanied supply deliveries from the nearby village that provided much of Silverfang's provisions. "There's a weakness," Derek reported, laying a hastily drawn map before Victor in the privacy of his chambers. "The supply road that runs along the western edge of Silverfang territory, guarded, but lightly compared to the main approaches. If we could arrange for her to be traveling that road, even briefly." "She never leaves the stronghold without heavy escort," Victor said, studying the map with careful attention. "Kale Ashford is not foolish enough to leave such an obvious vulnerability unprotected." "Not willingly," Derek agreed, "but there are ways to create circumstances that might force her hand. A crisis elsewhere in the territory, drawing attention and resources away from her protection. A message claiming urgent need for her testimony, delivered through channels that appear legitimate." Victor considered the suggestion carefully, his ambition warring briefly with the knowledge that any scheme discovered would place Ironclaw in direct, dangerous conflict with the most powerful pack in the region. But the promise of the Calloway bloodline's legendary power, the ability to settle even the most powerful wolf and command loyalty that no amount of force could otherwise secure, proved too tempting to abandon. "Prepare the message," Victor said finally. "Make it appear to come from the Council, requesting her presence at Ashwood Hollow for additional testimony regarding new developments in the Eastern investigation. Time it for a moment, when Kale's attention will be divided elsewhere. And if Kale insists on accompanying her personally, as he has every other time?" Victor's smile turned cold and calculating. "Then we ensure he has a more pressing crisis, demanding his attention that day. Something significant enough to require the Alpha King's personal involvement, drawing him away from the stronghold long enough for our plan to succeed." The scheme took shape over the following days, Derek coordinating with contacts capable of forging convincing Council correspondence, while Victor arranged for a manufactured crisis along Silverfang's northern border, a staged territorial dispute significant enough to require Kale's personal attention, timed carefully to coincide with the forged message's delivery. Kale, unaware of the trap being carefully constructed around him, received word of the northern border dispute 3 days later, a report of armed incursion from a smaller pack whose territory bordered Silverfang's northern edge, details specific and urgent enough that he could not dismiss it as anything less than a genuine threat requiring his direct involvement. "I don't like leaving during an active investigation into the eastern threat," Kale said, reviewing the report with Owen in the map room, frustration evident in his tightly controlled voice. "But an armed incursion on this scale cannot go unanswered." "I'll increase security around the stronghold in your absence," Owen assured him. "Ren will be protected." "She doesn't leave the walls," Kale said firmly, "under any circumstances, until I return." It was less than an hour after Kale departed for the northern border with a significant portion of Silverfang's forces that the forged council message arrived, carried by a messenger whose credentials appeared entirely legitimate, requesting Ren's immediate presence at Ashwood Hollow to provide additional testimony regarding a newly discovered pattern in the eastern disappearances, testimony the message claimed could not wait for Kale's return without risking further loss of life. Owen, presented with the seemingly urgent request and Kale's explicit instructions to protect the investigation's progress at all costs, found himself caught in an impossible position. The message bore the council's official seal, seemingly authentic in every detail, and refusing an urgent request tied to preventing further disappearances risked appearing as though Silverfang was obstructing an investigation that affected every pack in the region. "I don't like this," Owen said, studying the message with a frown, some instinct warning him that something did not sit right despite the message's apparent legitimacy. "Kale was explicit that she doesn't leave the walls." "The message claims lives are at stake," said Nathan, one of Owen's most trusted advisors. "If we refuse and something happens because we withheld information she could have provided, the political cost to Silverfang could be significant." Owen weighed the decision carefully, torn between his loyalty to Kale's explicit instructions and the genuine urgency the forged message conveyed. Ultimately, he made the choice that would haunt him in the hours that followed, agreeing to escort Ren to Ashwood Hollow with a reasonable guard, believing the neutral territory's protections would keep her safe even without Kale's presence. Ren, informed of the request, felt a flicker of unease she could not quite explain, some instinct warning her that the timing felt suspicious, arriving so precisely during Kale's absence. But the message's claim of preventing further loss of life weighed heavily against her hesitation, and she ultimately agreed to travel with Owen's escort, trusting the protection of Silverfang's warriors and the ancient neutrality of Ashwood Hollow to keep her safe. They departed within the hour, a company of a dozen Silverfang warriors escorting Ren along the western road that would eventually connect with the path toward Ashwood Hollow, the very road Victor's scheme had identified as Silverfang's most vulnerable approach. The ambush came less than 2 hours into the journey, at a narrow bend in the road where the forest pressed close on both sides, limiting the escort's ability to maneuver or retreat effectively. Ironclaw warriors emerged from the tree line in coordinated waves, their numbers significant enough to overwhelm the smaller Silverfang escort, despite the warriors' considerable skill and determination. "Protect her!" Owen shouted, drawing his weapon as the first wave of attackers closed the distance, understanding immediately that they had walked directly into a carefully planned trap. The fighting that followed was brutal and desperate, Silverfang warriors fighting with the ferocity of wolves defending something they understood to be more valuable than their own lives, while Ironclaw forces pressed their numerical advantage with ruthless efficiency. Ren, positioned at the center of the formation, as her guards had been trained to protect, felt fear coil through her chest as she watched warriors falling on both sides, understanding with growing horror that this attack, whatever its true purpose, was aimed directly at her. Victor Hale emerged from the tree line as the fighting reached its most desperate point, flanked by Derek and several of his most trusted warriors, his cold satisfaction evident even amid the chaos of battle. "Surrender the witness," Victor called out, his voice carrying easily over the sounds of combat, "and I'll allow your remaining warriors to withdraw with their lives." "Never," Owen growled, positioning himself directly between Victor and Ren, despite the blood already staining his own arm from an earlier exchange. "Kale will end you for this. Kale is occupied elsewhere. thanks to a border dispute that never actually existed, Victor said, his smile widening at Owen's dawning realization. By the time he learns the truth, the Calloway bloodline will already belong to Ironclaw. Wren felt the full weight of Victor's scheme settle over her, understanding now the elaborate deception that had separated her from Cale's protection so precisely, so deliberately. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, the same paralyzing terror that had haunted her since the night her family vanished without a trace. But something else stirred beneath that fear as well, a resolve that had been growing steadily since her arrival at Silverfang, since Cale's steady, unwavering protection had taught her that she no longer had to face danger through helpless silence alone. "I won't go with you," Wren said, stepping forward despite Owen's attempt to hold her back, her voice carrying with the same strange, undeniable power that had commanded the attention of an entire council gathering weeks before, though now, rather than calm, it carried something closer to defiant fury. Victor's expression flickered with surprise at her open defiance, and several of his warriors hesitated, some ancient, deeply buried instinct within them, responding to the power in her voice despite Victor's explicit orders. "You have no choice in the matter," Victor said, though his confidence had wavered slightly. "I always have a choice," Wren said, her voice growing steadier with each word, "and I choose to fight, rather than let anyone else be sacrificed for a bloodline I never asked to carry." As the standoff between Wren's defiance and Victor's determination hung in the tense air of the forest clearing, a new sound cut through the chaos, the thundering approach of horses moving at a punishing pace, and Cale Ashford emerged from the tree line behind Victor's forces, his expression carrying a fury more terrifying than anything the Ironclaw Alpha had ever witnessed. He had realized the deception almost as soon as he arrived at the northern border, finding no evidence of the armed incursion the forged report had described, and understanding with cold, immediate clarity exactly what kind of trap had been set for the woman he had left behind. He had ridden back with a speed that had nearly killed his horse, arriving just in time to see the confrontation reaching its most dangerous point. "Victor," Cale said, his voice carrying a controlled fury that silenced the clearing more effectively than any shout could have managed. "You've made a mistake you will not survive." Victor's confidence crumbled the moment he registered the sheer force Cale had brought with him, an entire company of Silverfang's finest warriors pouring from the tree line to surround the remaining Ironclaw fighters, who had already begun to falter after the losses inflicted by Owen's determined defense. "This is neutral matter," Victor said, attempting to salvage the situation with the same calculating composure that had served him throughout the scheme's planning. "A dispute over a valuable asset, nothing more. You attacked my warriors and attempted to kidnap someone under my direct protection," Cale said, dismounting and advancing steadily toward Victor, every step radiating a barely restrained violence that made even Victor's remaining fighters take involuntary steps backward. "There is no version of this that ends without consequence. The Calloway bloodline belongs to whoever can properly claim it," Victor said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "You cannot fault me for recognizing an opportunity that you were too sentimental to properly exploit." Cale's control finally shattered at those words, and he closed the remaining distance between himself and Victor in a single, fluid motion, driving his fist into the Ironclaw Alpha's jaw, with enough force to send him sprawling into the dirt. Victor's remaining warriors moved to defend their Alpha, but the overwhelming numbers Cale had brought made any continued resistance clearly suicidal, and one by one, they lowered their weapons in surrender. "She is not an asset," Cale said, standing over Victor with the same cold fury that had ended countless border disputes throughout his reign. "She is not a prize to be claimed, or a resource to be exploited. She is a person, and you will answer to the full authority of the Council for what you attempted here today." Victor spat blood into the dirt, glaring up at Cale with undisguised hatred. But the fight had gone entirely out of him, understanding with clear, undeniable certainty that he had gambled everything on a scheme that had failed catastrophically, and that whatever punishment the Council decided to impose would be severe. Cale turned away from him, his attention immediately shifting to Wren, who stood pale but unharmed at the center of what remained of her original escort, several warriors bearing wounds from the fierce defense they had mounted on her behalf. Owen, favoring his injured arm but otherwise steady, offered Cale a brief, exhausted nod of confirmation that Wren remained safe. Are you hurt? Kale asked, closing the distance between them, his hands finding her shoulders with a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the violence he had just delivered to Victor. I'm fine, Ren said, though her voice trembled slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear. Owen and the others, they fought so hard to protect me. They did their duty, Kale said, though his gratitude toward his warriors was evident in the way his gaze swept over each of them with genuine appreciation. And you fought too. Owen told me what happened before I arrived. Ren looked up at him, something vulnerable and open in her expression that had nothing to do with the danger they had just survived. I refused to let him take me without a fight. I refused to be helpless again. Kale's expression softened, pride mixing with the lingering fear that had driven him across the territory at breakneck speed, the moment he understood the deception that had separated them. You were never helpless, Ren, not from the moment I first heard you speak at Ashwood Hollow. The remaining Ironclaw warriors were bound and prepared for transport back to Silverfang, where they would await the Council's judgment alongside Victor himself, whose ambitions had cost him not only his scheme, but likely his standing among the region's alphas as well. As the company began the journey home, Kale insisted on riding directly beside Ren, unwilling to allow even the smallest distance between them after the terror of nearly losing her. That evening, after Victor and his captured warriors had been secured within the stronghold's most heavily guarded chambers to await formal judgment, and after the wounded had received proper care from Silverfang's healers, Kale found Ren alone on the same balcony where he had first learned of the summons to Ashwood Hollow, looking out over the darkened forest with an expression he could not quite read. You should be resting, Kale said, joining her at the balcony's edge. I couldn't sleep, Ren admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see Victor's warriors closing in. I hear him talking about me, like I was something to be claimed, rather than someone with a choice in my own fate. Kale was quiet for a moment, understanding the particular horror of what she had experienced, the echo of her own family's disappearance, now compounded by the very real threat of being taken by force, treated as a prize rather than a person. I should never have left you unprotected, Kale said, guilt heavy in his voice. The forged message, the manufactured crisis at the border. I should have questioned it more carefully. You couldn't have known, Ren said. Victor planned this carefully, precisely to exploit the trust you had every reason to place in legitimate council correspondence. That doesn't make it easier to accept how close I came to losing you, Kale said, the admission raw and unguarded in a way that few words he had ever spoken had been. Ren turned to face him fully, something fierce and determined settling into her expression, despite the exhaustion of the day's events. I need you to understand something, Kale. I won't spend my life being protected from every danger by hiding behind walls, even walls as strong as Silverfang's. I spent a year running from fear, and it nearly cost me everything anyway. If I'm going to face whatever this bloodline means, whatever continues to hunt me, I need to face it as someone with agency, not as something precious to be locked away. Kale studied her carefully, recognizing the truth in her words, even as every protective instinct within him rebelled against the idea of allowing her anywhere near danger again. I hear you, he said finally, but you have to understand something as well. What I feel for you isn't about protecting an asset or fulfilling some ancient legend about a bloodline fated to settle my beast. It's about you, Ren Calloway, the person who chose to speak the truth at Ashwood Hollow despite every reason to stay silent, who chose to fight rather than surrender to Victor's demands, who has taught me more about what it means to feel something real than I've learned in 10 years of ruling this territory. Ren's breath caught, and Kale watched tears finally spill from eyes that had remained fiercely controlled throughout the day's terror, tears that seemed to carry not sorrow, but the release of emotion held too carefully in check for far too long. I love you, Kale said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable, spoken aloud for the first time, in a voice stripped of every careful, controlled authority he had spent his life cultivating. Not because of some ancient prophecy, not because your voice happens to settle something in me I've never fully understood. I love you because of who you are, because of the courage I've watched you find, even after losing everything, because somehow, impossibly, you've become the one thing in this world I cannot imagine living without. Ren closed the remaining distance between them, and Kale wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the tension and fear of the day finally began to ease from both their bodies, replaced by something steadier, something that felt, for the first time since either of them could remember, entirely and completely safe. "I love you too," Ren said softly, her voice muffled against his chest. "I think I have since that first moment at Ashwood Hollow, though I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." They stood together on the balcony for a long while after that, the weight of the day's danger finally giving way to something warmer, something that neither the ancient legend of the Calloway bloodline nor Victor's failed scheme could diminish. But even as they allowed themselves this moment of hard-won peace, Kale knew that the greater threat, the creature that had erased 3 entire packs and now searched actively for Ren, remained unresolved, waiting somewhere in the eastern forest for its next opportunity to strike. Whatever came next, Kale understood with absolute certainty. He would face it with Ren beside him, not as a witness to protect or a legend to fulfill, but as the woman he loved, standing together against whatever darkness still threatened to take her from him. The creature came for Ren 3 nights after Victor's failed scheme, choosing a moment when Silverfang's attention remained partially divided between securing the captured Ironclaw warriors and coordinating with the council about the appropriate judgment for Victor's actions. It began with a sound that only Ren could hear, a low, resonant call carried on the night wind that reached into the deepest part of her mind, pulling at something ancient and instinctive that she had never fully understood until this moment. She woke suddenly in her chambers, her heart racing, understanding immediately that whatever had erased her family and hunted the other Calloway-blooded packs had finally arrived at Silverfang's doorstep. She rose from her bed, drawn toward the window despite every instinct warning her against it, and found herself staring out into the darkened forest that surrounded the stronghold, watching shadows move between the trees in patterns too deliberate to be natural. The guards posted outside her door, she realized with growing horror, had gone silent. Ren forced herself away from the window's pull, fighting against the compulsion that urged her to walk directly toward the source of that terrible, beautiful call, and made her way to the door instead, finding both guards slumped against the corridor wall, breathing but unconscious, their expressions strangely peaceful, despite the danger surrounding them. "Kale," she whispered, though the sound barely carried past her own lips, fear constricting her throat. She moved through the darkened stronghold as quickly as she dared, her bare feet silent against the stone floors, searching for any sign of Kale or Owen or anyone who might help her understand what was happening. The corridors seemed emptier than they should have been at this hour, and the strange, pulling call continued to grow stronger with every passing moment, promising something she could not name, something that felt both familiar and deeply, fundamentally wrong. She found Kale in the map room, still awake despite the late hour, poring over reports related to Victor's captured forces, and the relief that flooded through her at the sight of him was immediate and overwhelming. "Ren, what's wrong?" Kale asked, rising immediately at the sight of her pale, frightened expression. "It's here," Ren said, her voice shaking. "The creature. I can hear it calling, and the guards outside my door. They're unconscious. Kale, not dead, but something happened to them." Kale's expression hardened into the focused intensity of a wolf, preparing for battle, and he moved immediately to sound the alarm that would rouse every warrior within the stronghold's walls, understanding with cold clarity that the threat they had feared for weeks had finally arrived, and that it had somehow bypassed Silverfang's formidable defenses to reach directly for Ren. The stronghold erupted into organized chaos within minutes, warriors pouring from their quarters to take defensive positions throughout the fortress, while Owen coordinated a systematic search for the source of the strange, incapacitating effect that had claimed the guards outside Ren's chambers. Kale refused to leave Ren's side, positioning himself between her and every corridor, every doorway, every possible approach the creature might use to reach her. It was in the Great Hall, beneath the ancient stone arches that had witnessed 100 years of Silverfang's history, that the creature finally revealed itself. It emerged from shadows that seemed to bend and twist unnaturally around its form, a shape that defied easy description, part wolf and part something far older and stranger, its eyes glowing with a pale, unnatural light that seemed to pull at the edges of Ren's vision even from across the vast hall. When it opened its jaws, the same terrible, beautiful call that had woken Ren from her sleep filled the air, though this time it carried words, ancient and resonant, speaking directly into the deepest part of her mind. "Come to me, daughter of Calloway. Your bloodline belongs with those who understand its true purpose." Ren felt the pull of that voice like a physical force, her body straining against the compulsion, even as her mind screamed in protest, understanding now, with terrible clarity, exactly how her family and the other Calloway-blooded packs had been lured to their doom. "Fight it," Cale said fiercely, gripping her hand tightly, positioning his own body as a barrier between her and the creature's advancing form. "Whatever it's doing to your mind, fight it, Ren. You're stronger than this." Around them, Silverfang's warriors poured into the great hall, weapons drawn, ready to defend their territory against a threat unlike anything they had faced before. But as they moved to attack, the creature's voice shifted, and the same pulling compulsion that had targeted Ren now swept across the gathered warriors, several of them faltering mid-stride, their weapons lowering as confusion clouded their expressions. It can affect anyone, Owen realized with growing alarm, forcing himself to shake off the strange, disorienting pull that had briefly clouded his own mind. Not just Ren. "Then we attack together, before it can focus its power on any single target," Cale commanded, and the warriors rallied around his voice, using the strength of numbers and coordinated assault to press forward, despite the creature's disorienting influence. The battle that followed was unlike anything Cale had experienced in a decade of leading Silverfang's warriors. The creature moved with impossible speed, evading physical attacks with an almost liquid grace, while its unsettling voice continued to weave through the chaos of battle, targeting first one warrior, and then another, sowing confusion and hesitation among even Silverfang's most disciplined fighters. Ren, watching the battle unfold with growing desperation, understood suddenly that physical strength alone would not be enough to defeat this creature. It fed on voice, on compulsion, on the terrible power to call and control. And if that was true, then perhaps the answer to defeating it lay not in Cale's formidable strength, but in the very bloodline the creature sought to claim. "I have an idea," Ren said, pulling free from where Cale had positioned her protectively against the wall. "Ren, no, stay back. If it commands through voice, maybe voice is exactly what can stop it," Ren said, already moving toward the center of the hall despite Cale's protest, understanding with sudden, desperate clarity that she alone might carry the power needed to counter the creature's ancient, terrible gift. She positioned herself directly in the creature's path, and when it turned its glowing, unnatural eyes toward her, recognizing in her presence the very prize it had hunted across 3 territories, Ren did not flinch away from its terrible attention. Instead, she opened her mouth and began to sing, an old song her mother had taught her long before she understood its true significance. A melody carried through generations of the Calloway bloodline, meant not to compel or command, but to protect, to calm, to settle even the most volatile and dangerous of creatures. The effect was immediate and profound. The creature staggered, its unnatural form flickering, as though caught between 2 states of existence, its terrible call faltering beneath the weight of Ren's steady, unwavering voice. Around the hall, the warriors who had fallen under its confusing influence began to shake off the fog clouding their minds, drawn back to clarity by the calming power of Ren's song. "It's working," Owen shouted, pressing his advantage against the momentarily weakened creature. "Whatever she's doing, it's working." Cale moved to Ren's side even as she continued singing, positioning himself protectively beside her, while allowing her voice the space it needed to work its ancient magic against the creature that had haunted her for so long. He watched, with a mixture of awe and fierce pride, as the woman he loved wielded the very gift that had once made her feel cursed, transforming it instead into the weapon that might finally end the threat that had stolen everything from her. The creature let out a final, terrible cry as Ren's song reached its crescendo, its form beginning to dissolve into the same shifting shadows from which it had first emerged, its ancient power finally overwhelmed by a voice more powerful than its own. A voice rooted not in domination, but in genuine, unwavering love and protection. When the last echoes of the creature's cry faded into silence, and the shadows that had carried its terrible form finally dispersed entirely, the great hall fell into a stunned, exhausted quiet, broken only by the ragged breathing of warriors who had fought a battle unlike any they had faced before. Ren swayed on her feet, the effort of the confrontation finally catching up with her, and Kale caught her before she could fall, holding her steady as relief and exhaustion swept through the gathered company. "Is it gone?" Ren asked weakly, looking up at Kale with eyes that held both fear and cautious hope. "I don't know," Kale admitted honestly, "but whatever just happened, you did something no one else could have done. You saved us, Ren. You saved everyone in this hall." Ren allowed herself to lean fully into Kale's support, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally giving way to overwhelming exhaustion, and Kale lifted her gently, carrying her from the great hall while Owen began the work of accounting for the warriors affected by the creature's strange influence and securing the stronghold against any possibility of its return. Whatever the creature truly was, wherever it had come from, and whatever ancient conflict had first pitted it against the Calloway bloodline generations ago, Kale understood with absolute certainty that Ren had just proven something far more important than any legend could have predicted. She was not merely a bloodline to be protected, or a witness to be shielded from danger. She was a wolf capable of standing against the very darkness that had haunted her for a year, and she had chosen, in the moment that mattered most, to use her extraordinary gift, not for herself, but to protect everyone she had come to care for within the walls of Silverfang. The weeks that followed the battle in the Great Hall brought a change to Silverfang territory that even the oldest elders struggled to fully describe. News of what happened spread quickly through the region, carried by warriors who had witnessed Ren's extraordinary courage firsthand, and by council representatives, eager to understand the full implications of an ancient bloodline's power, finally revealed after generations of legend and rumor. The creature did not return, not in the weeks that followed, nor in the months after that, and Iris's continued research into the old records suggested that Ren's song had done more than simply repel the threat that night. It had, according to the oldest and most reliable fragments of legend she uncovered, severed the ancient connection that had allowed the creature to sense and hunt Calloway-blooded wolves across the generations, a connection built on fear and isolation that Ren's courage, and the love that had grown around her within Silverfang's walls, had finally been strong enough to break. Victor Hale's judgment came before the full council 2 weeks after the confrontation, his scheme against Ren adding significant weight to the punishment ultimately handed down. Stripped of a portion of Ironclaw's territory as reparation to Silverfang, and placed under close council observation for a period of years, Victor's ambitions had cost him dearly, a lesson that rippled through every pack in the region about the consequences of treating any wolf, regardless of bloodline or gift, as a prize to be claimed, rather than a person deserving respect. Kale attended the judgment personally, standing beside Ren throughout the proceedings, no longer as her protector alone, but as her equal, her partner in facing whatever challenges still lay ahead for both of them. The council, and the gathered alphas from across the region, could not help but notice the change in the Alpha King, who had once been known solely for his cold, unshakable strength. He remained every bit as formidable, every bit as commanding in matters of leadership and justice, but something warmer had settled into his presence as well, visible in the way his hand found Ren's without conscious thought, in the way his careful, controlled expression softened whenever she spoke. "The Alpha King has changed," Edric observed quietly to Iris as the gathering concluded, watching Kale and Ren walk together toward their waiting horses. "I confess I did not expect to see it in my lifetime. Some bonds are simply meant to happen," Iris replied, a knowing smile touching her weathered features. "No matter how carefully a wolf might try to guard against them." Back at Silverfang, life settled into a new rhythm neither Kale nor Ren could have imagined when they first met at Ashwood Hollow weeks earlier. Ren, no longer a wolf without a pack, found herself embraced fully by the Silverfang community, her courage during the battle earning her respect that extended far beyond her connection to the Alpha King. She began teaching young pups the old songs her mother had taught her, passing down fragments of Calloway tradition that had nearly been lost forever, ensuring that whatever remained of her bloodline's ancient gift would continue for generations to come, no longer hidden in fear, but celebrated as the protective legacy it had always been meant to be. Kale, for his part, found that the walls he had spent a decade building around his heart had not weakened him as he once feared vulnerability might. If anything, the openness he had allowed himself with Ren had made him a stronger leader, more attuned to the needs and concerns of the wolves under his protection, more willing to trust the counsel of those around him, rather than carrying every burden in isolated, controlled silence. One evening, months after the creature's defeat, as autumn began to color the forest surrounding Silverfang in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Kale found Ren once again in the garden near the eastern wing, tending to the herbs that had grown so thoroughly under her care that the small plot had become one of the stronghold's most cherished spaces. "You seem thoughtful," Kale observed, settling onto the low stone wall beside her. "I was thinking about how far we've come," Ren said, brushing dirt from her hands as she turned to face him. "A year ago, I was alone, running from a danger I couldn't understand, believing I would never have a place to truly belong. Now," she gestured around them, at the stronghold that had become her home, at the community that had welcomed her without hesitation. "Now you have a pack," Kale said softly, "a real one." "I have you," Ren said, reaching for his hand. "That's more than I ever let myself hope for." Kale studied her for a long moment, the woman whose voice had first unraveled every careful defense he had built around himself, who had proven, time and again, that true strength came not from isolation and control, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to love, despite every reason fear might offer to hold back. "I was the most powerful wolf alive," Kale said, echoing words that had defined his reputation for a decade, though his voice now carried none of the cold, distant authority those words had once demanded. "Feared by every pack, unbeaten in every battle I ever fought. And none of that strength meant anything, not truly, until the moment I heard your voice." Ren's eyes softened, tears gathering that she no longer needed to hide or fear, tears born entirely of a happiness she had once believed impossible to reclaim. "You gave me back everything I thought I had lost," Ren said. "A home, a family, a reason to believe that the darkness that took everything from me didn't get to decide how my story ended. Our story," Kale corrected gently. "It's ours now, however it continues from here." As the sun set over Silverfang territory, casting the same golden light across the stronghold's ancient walls that had greeted Ren on her very first arrival, Kale Ashford, the Alpha King who had once believed himself invincible through strength alone, understood a truth that no legend, no ancient prophecy, could have fully captured on its own. His power had never truly been tested, not until the moment a voice he could not resist taught him what real strength actually meant. Not the ability to win every battle without hesitation, but the courage to open his heart despite every wall he had built against it, to choose vulnerability alongside strength, and to find, in the woman beside him, not a weakness to overcome, but the very source of a happiness he had spent his entire life believing he did not need. The most powerful wolf alive had finally found something worth more than any territory, any reputation, any victory he had ever claimed. And as he pulled Ren close, watching the last light of day fade into a peaceful evening over the home they had built together, Kale understood, with complete and unshakable certainty, that he would never again resist the one voice that had taught him how to truly live.